Imagine taking a wrong turn while driving. It's annoying, right? Maybe you hit traffic, have to loop back. But what if that wrong turn actually landed you in a detention center, facing maybe even deportation?
Yeah, it sounds extreme, but that's sort of what seems to be happening.
Okay, so let's unpack this. There's something really unexpected going on at the Detroit, Canada Ambassador Bridge.
Hmm.
Between January and April this year, 2025, a growing number of people, and often they're immigrants, are getting detained. And it seems to be happening after these, well, unintentional wrong turns near the border.
And what's really striking is just the sheer number of people. We're seeing a clear pattern here. People making what look like simple driving mistakes
Right.
and then facing these huge immigration consequences
Right.
right there at a major border crossing.
Exactly. So in this deep dive, we want to figure out, why these wrong turns are leading to detention, sometimes deportation. What's the actual impact on the people caught up in this? And what's being done about it?
We've been looking at recent reports to try and get a handle on it.
Yeah, and for you listening, we know you want to be informed quickly, thoroughly, without getting totally bogged down. So we're going to focus on the key things you need to know.
Well, the information really points towards a system, maybe, that just wasn't built for this kind of situation, these accidental crossings.
Right.
It doesn't seem like these are mainly people trying to sneak into Canada.
Right.
The evidence suggests, folks are making a mistake on the road, but with really serious legal outcomes.
Okay, so let's start with the problem itself. These accidental border crossings, the numbers are pretty startling.
Yeah.
From January to April 2025, over 213 people were detained right there at the Ambassador Bridge.
Over 200.
Yeah. And here's the kicker. Over 90% of those detentions classified as accidental.
90%. Wow. That high number really tells you something about intent, doesn't it?
It does.
These aren't primarily people trying to get around immigration rules. Mostly it's just people who took a wrong turn.
And when you look at why they're making these wrong turns, it actually makes sense. Think about it. Confusing road signs, maybe not clear enough. There's ongoing construction, which always means detours and changes.
Oh, yeah. Construction zones are notoriously tricky.
And then just the usual heavy traffic you get around a big international border like the Ambassador Bridge. You can easily see how someone may be unfamiliar with the area or just, following their GPS.
Right. Relying on technology that might not be perfectly updated.
Could accidentally end up pointed towards Canada, towards that checkpoint.
And the reports show it's not just like single drivers getting lost. We're talking about families caught up in this.
Yeah.
Even people who live nearby, people who had absolutely zero intention of crossing the border. There are stories of people just making deliveries, running errands inside Detroit, and boom, suddenly they're at the CBP checkpoint.
Yeah.
U.S. Customs and Border Protection.
Right. And that one case you mentioned earlier, that family, that was really concerning. A family with 2 kids, U.S. citizens.
Yeah.
Detained for 12 days just because of a wrong turn. 12 days.
12 days. That really hits home, the kind of disruption and, frankly, distress these incidents cause.
So once someone is detained, what happens then? The consequences sound pretty severe.
They can be, yeah. Reports describe the CBP detention facilities. Well, they're often meant for very short-term holding.
Okay.
But now they're being used for longer stretches. This might mean windowless rooms, people sleeping on cots,
Not ideal.
and potentially a lack of basic necessities. That's a real worry when you have families, especially with little kids. Things like diapers, essential medicines, they might not be easily available.
That sounds incredibly difficult. And it's not just the physical conditions, is it?
No, not at all. A huge issue is getting legal help. Families have described it as like a black hole.
A black hole.
Yeah. Trying to find out where their loved one is, what's actually happening. Even lawyers are reporting struggles getting information, getting access to their clients. It's very opaque.
Wow. That lack of information, that lack of access,
Yeah.
it raises serious questions.
Definitely. It brings up fundamental due process concerns. As Christine Suave from the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center pointed out, everyone physically present in the U.S., regardless of status, has a right to due process.
Right.
And when you have a system where communication is so limited and getting a lawyer is that hard, well, that basic right is potentially at risk.
Okay, to really grasp the human side of this, let's look at that specific case you mentioned earlier, Ricardo Prada Vasquez. His story is a pretty stark example.
Yeah, Mr. Vasquez's situation really shows how fast things can escalate and just how serious the consequences can be. He was Venezuelan, working as a food delivery driver in Detroit.
Okay.
Back in January 2025, he's making a delivery, takes a wrong turn, ends up on the Ambassador Bridge. simple mistake.
And he was actually in the U.S. legally at the time, correct? He'd used the CBP One app?
That's right. He entered through the CBP One app, which, yeah, is often used for scheduling appointments at ports of entry back in November 2024. So he had what's called parolee status. He was allowed to be here.
Okay, so legally present. But then what happened after the wrong turn?
Well, authorities accused him of having ties to a gang called Tren de Aragua. They apparently based this on some tattoos he had.
Yeah, choose.
Yeah. His family completely denied it. They insisted he had absolutely no connection to any gang.
But despite those denials...
Despite the denials, he was designated a public safety threat, and that triggered a fast-track deportation process.
Fast-track, okay.
But here's a really critical and frankly strange detail. He wasn't deported to Venezuela, his home country.
Where did they send him?
They deported him to El Salvador in March 2025.
El Salvador. Did he have any connection there?
Not that anyone knows of. No known ties.
Yeah.
And it gets even more worrying from there.
How so?
After being taken to this massive prison complex in El Salvador called CICAD, Ricardo Prado Vasquez essentially disappeared from Salvadoran records.
Disappeared.
Vanished.
Yeah.
His family hasn't heard from him, hasn't had any contact since mid-March.
That's terrifying. It just highlights all the concerns about these rapid deportations, the lack of, a proper, fair legal process.
Exactly. Advocates are arguing the evidence linking him to the gang was thin, maybe non-existent, and deporting him to a country he didn't know. Well, it's deeply problematic.
So how are officials and advocacy groups responding to all this?
Well, it's definitely getting attention. Representative Rashida Tlaib held a press conference just recently, April 24th, 2025. She was there with groups like the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center, ACLU Michigan.
Okay.
And they were calling for more transparency from CBP, better treatment for people detained after these accidental crossings, basically demanding answers and changes.
Has CBP acknowledged the problem?
To some extent, yes. CBP officials have reportedly admitted that their current setup, their system, wasn't really designed for this surge in detentions from wrong turns.
Especially the families.
Exactly. They've apparently said that holding families in these border facilities like this is a relatively new thing for them.
Are they doing anything?
Officials say they're trying to get more resources into the detention facilities. But the advocacy groups, they're pushing for bigger, more fundamental changes.
Like what?
Well, first off, clearer signs around the Ambassador Bridge.
Yeah.
Big ones, obvious ones, to stop people making the mistake in the first place.
Makes sense. Better infrastructure.
Yeah, improving the road layout too. And definitely more oversight of how CBP handles detentions, ensuring people get basic things like diapers, medicine, access to lawyers.
And reviewing the whole detention process itself.
Right, reviewing CBP's actual authority to hold people for extended periods in these kinds of situations, maybe without seeing a judge quickly.
Now, you mentioned earlier this isn't just impacting immigrants.
Yeah.
What are the broader worries here?
That's a key point. Civil rights groups are warning that, if non-citizens can be detained like this for what seem like minor accidental errors with limited communication, limited due process, could that set a precedent? Could it potentially erode protections for citizens down the line too? It raises big questions about government power and individual rights safeguards.
And there are practical impacts too, right? Like for businesses.
Absolutely. Think about delivery services, other employers. They're suddenly finding workers are just gone, detained for days, maybe weeks, unexpectedly. That disrupts business.
And just the anxiety for people living near the bridge.
For sure. Imagine living nearby, making regular trips. It creates this background anxiety that a simple drive, a small mistake, could lead to a really traumatic experience.
It really shows how something like, immigration enforcement is tied directly to very local things, like how roads are designed, how signs are put up.
Exactly. That connection between immigration policy and everyday infrastructure is often overlooked, but this situation throws it into sharp relief.
Let's circle back to the legal side. That right to due process, it's supposed to be fundamental.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And a major obstacle here, as we discussed, is the difficulty getting a lawyer quickly.
Right, the black hole.
Yeah. Without good legal advice, people might not understand their rights, the procedures, how to even argue their case effectively.
So decisions might get made.
Decisions might get made without all the facts being heard, without a proper legal review. That seems to be a huge concern in the Prado Vasquez case, for instance. Was there enough evidence? Was the process fair?
So, boiling it down, what are the main fixes being proposed? What are the key recommendations?
Okay, so the big ones are definitely better road signs, clearer, bigger, better placement, updating the actual roads and ramps near the bridge to make navigation easier, less confusing.
Infrastructure, basically.
Yes. Then more oversight of the detention facilities and CBP's practices. Better communication, letting families and lawyers know what's going on,
Crucial.
ensuring basic needs are met in detention. And finally, really looking at CBP's power to detain people in these accidental crossing scenarios, potentially limiting how long someone could be held without a more formal process, more communication.
And in the meantime, there's practical advice being given out, too.
Yeah, immigrant rights groups are advising delivery drivers, others who might be vulnerable, to maybe just avoid roads right near the border if they can,
Wow.
and to always carry their immigration papers with them, just in case.
That really shows the level of fear and uncertainty this has created in the community, doesn't it?
It does, it's a coping mechanism. But ideally, the system itself needs fixing so people don't have to live with that kind of worry.
So let's wrap this up. The key takeaway here seems pretty clear. Simple mistakes, just a wrong turn near the Detroit-Canada border, are leading to incredibly serious immigration consequences for quite a few people.
Yeah, it's this potent mix of like infrastructure problems, confusing roads, signs meeting strict enforcement policies.
And the human cost is undeniable. We're talking family separation, immense stress, and in cases like Ricardo Prado Vasquez, this deeply troubling uncertainty about his fate after deportation. His disappearance is chilling.
It really is.
For you listening, wanting to understand these complex situations, this really shows how immigration policy, physical infrastructure, and basic human rights are all tangled together.
It leaves us with a pretty significant question to ponder, doesn't it? How do we balance the real need for border security with ensuring fairness? How do we stop unintentional mistakes from leading to such drastic, life-altering consequences?
And maybe what role do those everyday decisions about roads and signs play in striking that balance?
Yeah, something to think about.
If you want to dig deeper into the official rules, you could check out the websites for U.S. Customs and Border Protection CBP and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS. They have info on border crossing rules and the whole removal process. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.